All right, what's up, Dragon Brood? In a little bit of a strange sequence of events, we got a bunch of previews for Duskmourn, even though it doesn't come out for like 8 weeks after Bloomburrow. But I figured since they're out, we might as well talk about them. So let's see what this House of Horrors is all about. All right, first up, we have Doomsday Excruciator. This is 6 black mana, so black, 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 black. That is a lot. It's a 6/6 demon with flying. When it enters, if it was cast, each player exiles all but the bottom 6 cards of their library face down. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card. This card is wild, right? Like, this is like the super mill card. Like, everybody loses everything but their bottom 6. Now, this does have to be cast, so you can't just like trick it into play or reanimate it or whatever. You have to actually work to cast it. But if you do, this thing is a wild card. Especially if you have somebody just mill somebody for 4 or 5 cards right after that, namely Jace. You could do some pretty silly things with this. Now, do I think it's going to be a major player? At least not right now. I don't know how we would productively get to 6 black mana easily, or what deck actually wants that necessarily. But it's neat. Screaming Nemesis. This is a 3 mana, so 2 colorless and a red for a 3/3 spirit. It has haste. Whenever it's dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any other target. If a creature is dealt damage this way, they can't... No, if a player is dealt damage this way, they can't gain life for the rest of the game. Yeah, so I'm seeing these as you see them, obviously. But this is interesting, right? It's a 3 mana 3/3, already really good. It's a little bit of a higher cost than what the current mono red decks want to play. However, mono red's going to have a shift into the new standard because they do lose several cards, like Commander Face's Kakazan. I'd have to go back. I think Monastery Mentor. I'd have to look and see if it's legal or not. But there are a few bits and pieces they lose, like Play with Fire, I believe, and a couple others. So they're going to be looking for some other options. This is a 3/3 body with haste, which is really good, especially like after a sweeper or whatever. But the ability to not gain life the rest of the game is actually pretty strong. That's one of the holdups this deck has, or this deck type has. And honestly, this card is actually really strong because even if you were to block it, then it gets to deal damage, which means you don't get to gain life the rest of the game. So you almost have to exile this or kill it with some non-damage bot removal to not have it get you. Now, interestingly, it actually doesn't harm you if it just deals damage to you directly, which is funny if you just take the 3. But here's an interesting thing. If your opponent was going to gain life, you could technically shoot your Screaming Nemesis for 1 or 2 damage just to deal damage to the opponent. At least the way it reads, right? When it's dealt damage. Yeah, so it's not the source of the damage hesitate. Yeah, so this card, it's going to lead to some ugly situations for sure. Come Back Wrong. This is a cool name with like the zombie art. This is like all Pet Cemetery or whatever. But 2 colorless and a black for a sorcery. Destroy target creature. If a creature card is put into a graveyard this way, return it to the battlefield under your control. Sacrifices at the beginning of the next end step. This is a strong removal card. It is sorcery speed, so that's awesome. And it is during the next end step that it goes away, so you basically get it for the turn. It doesn't say it gains haste or anything, so you just return it to the battlefield under your control. Maybe it has an ETB ability or something like that. You get that advantage, and then after that, it just dies. So it's a good all-around removal, but has some upside, just not crazy. But it's a cool card and probably will get some play. Oh, this is a creepy looking thing. Overlord of the Hauntwoods. 3 colorless, green for it's an enchantment creature. Avatar horror. I expect we're going to see a lot of horrors in this set. It's a 6/5. It has impending 4 for colorless, green. If you cast a spell for its impending cost, it enters with 4 time counters on it. So it's just like the other stuff we've had before. Why did we give it a new name? And it isn't a creature until the last thing is removed. At the beginning of your end step, remove a time counter from it. Whenever this card enters or attacks, create a tapped colorless land token named everywhere that is every basic land type. Interesting. So when it comes into the battlefield or it attacks, you keep making a land, or at least a land token that is every basic land type. That's kind of quirky. Like, it's cool because it just gives you infinite mana to keep doing whatever you want every time you attack or whatever. Not infinite, but a lot, obviously. I'm just trying to figure out impending, and like, if this spell, if you cast a spell for its impending cost, it enters with 4 time counters, and it isn't a creature until the last is removed. At the beginning of your end step, remove a time counter from it. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. This is just like fine. It's weird that it comes in at the end of turn because you remove time counters at the beginning of your end step, and then when it has none, it comes into play. This is a wild card, right? Because if you do it on turn 3, then you'll have to wait 3 more turns to get it into play, which would be turn 6 effectively when you could just have it on turn 5. But if you don't have anything else to do with your mana on 3, you just do that, and now you could play other stuff. Then eventually this hits. But that also gets around some of the turns where your opponent would have a sweeper or a sunfall on like turn 5. Then you just get this for free, and you get a bonus land. So now you have 6 mana to use. Like, yeah, this is going to be an interesting card to have to figure out. I don't know how good this is yet, but getting a land perpetually every time you attack or whatever is kind of cool. Okay, this one I had seen before. It's Twitching Doll. It's a colorless and a green for a 2/2 artifact creature spider toy. You tap it, add a mana of any color, and you put a nest counter on Twitching Doll. You can tap it, sacrifice the doll, create a 2/2 green spider creature token with reach for each counter on Twitching Doll. Activate only as a sorcery. This is creepy artwork. Like, it's a cat doll made out of spiders. Like, Anyway, the card itself. There's a lot going on here, actually, because one, it's an artifact creature. So it counts as an artifact. Maybe if you're playing some updated version of Simic Cookies or something like that, works perfectly for that. The ability to make a spider or sacrifice it so you can get the spiders only activates as a sorcery. So you can't do this in response to your opponent targeting it or anything like that. You just have to decide if you're going to use it for mana or we're going to sacrifice it and get the spiders. Now, there's also some builds where maybe you get fancy and you can tap it, untap it, and do whatever, and then you just sacrifice it and get like 4 dudes. Like, that's a thing. Definitely a playable card. I think at the end of the day, though, it's going to come down to, does your deck you're playing it in want an artifact over some other mana creature? And do the spider tokens matter for the strategy you're playing? And that's going to be, we're not going to really know until we start seeing what some of the decks look like. But it is an interesting card. Enduring Tenacity. 2 colorless, green. It's an enchantment creature, Snake Glimmer. Interesting. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. Oh boy, it's one of those. When it dies, if it was a creature, return to the battlefield under its owner's control. It's an enchantment, and it's a 4/3. So this is quirky. So it's a 4/3 you can fight with. At any point you gain life, your opponent loses that much life. There's already some decks, some Orzhov life gain that this goes right in, obviously. And then if it dies, it just returns to the battlefield as an enchantment. Like, this card's really good. Honestly, this card, and there's a lot of incidental things that gain life too. Like this, oh man, this card's going to be a nuisance. This is going to be the type of card you're going to want to exile, like, or pack a lot of enchantment removal. But yeah, pretty sweet. And it's a 4/3 for 4, so it's not like the best thing, but also not the smallest thing. But you also don't really care if it dies because you get it anyway as an enchantment. So yeah, lots going on with this card, but I kind of dig it. The Wandering Rescuer. 3 colorless, white. Actually, I wonder if this is the Wandering Emperor just as a card. I bet it is. But it's a legendary creature, human, samurai, noble. So humans get a new cool thing. It does have flash. It's a 3/4. It has Convoke, which is also very good. It has Double Strike, and other tapped creatures you control have hexproof. My goodness, there's a lot going on with this thing. Okay, there's a lot to decipher here. First off, 5 mana card. Really cool. Because it's a 3/4, it has flash, and it has 3 relevant abilities. So for 5 mana, like, it's pricey, but one of those abilities is Convoke. So you could just put this into play during some end step. You can respond to creatures dying by putting this into play. Also, you can attack. And maybe you leave one or two things back. Your opponent goes to kill some stuff during the attack step. And you're like, you know what? I'm going to tap the remainder of my lands. Boom. Now my creatures have hexproof. Right? And the card itself has double strike. So you can even flash it in to get a tricky block if you need to. This is a cool card. Now, 5 mana is still going to be a restriction, even with Convoke. But it's a pretty cool card that you'll have to be aware of, or you could just randomly lose to this existing in somebody's deck. Like, this is a cool card, though. Fear of missing out. Well, that is a fear of sorts, not the traditional one we think about. Oh, wait, but fear of missing out is a creature. Wow, okay. It's a colorless and a red for a 2/3. Enchantment creature Nightmare. When fear of missing out enters, discard a card, then draw a card. And then if you have Delirium, which I believe is, the different types of cards in the graveyard, whenever fear of missing out attacks for the first time each turn, if there are 4 or more card types, well, there you go, it's telling you there, among cards in your graveyard, you untap target creature. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase. So this is just an efficient little body to get an extra attack step. It's a 2 mana 2/3, so very solid. You get to discard a card, draw a card. Actually, you don't get to, you have to. Discard a card, draw a card. And then whenever it attacks, you just get another attack step. Yeah, I'm down with this card. This has to get some amount of play, right? And again, mono red might look different and play it. Gruul might want to play something like this. Gruul could be nightmarish with this and the Quake Mole, right? Ansrog. That could be a problem. So, yeah, there could be some gross stuff that could happen with this card. Nowhere to Run. This is a very typical sounding black card. It's a colorless and a black for an enchantment that does have flash. When it enters, target creature an opponent controls gets -3/-3 till end of turn. So it's basically 2 mana, target creature gets -3/-3. Creatures your opponent control, your opponent's plural control, can be the target of spells and abilities as though they didn't have hexproof. Ward abilities on those creatures don't trigger. Wow, so this just turns off ward and hexproof. Now, wow, this is interesting because this card might be used more often to just kill a thing. But if it doesn't kill a thing, and let's say you just want to shrink like a 5-power creature or a 6-power creature, now none of your opponent's things have ward or hexproof that matters. This is an interesting card. I think it'll get played just as a removal spell more often than anything, but it's cool that it has an extra upside. Not that we needed to give black more upside cards, but here we are. Toby Beasty Befriender. 2 colorless and a white for a 1/1 legendary creature human wizard. When Toby Beasty Befriender enters, create a 4/4 white beast creature token with this creature can't attack or block alone, as long as you control 4 or more creature tokens. Creature tokens you control have flying. Wow, I like this card. 3 mana 1/1, so not stellar, but technically you get 5/5 worth of creature because you get an additional 4/4. Now the 4/4 is useless if you don't have another creature, but as long as you do, it can attack and block alongside other stuff. And then if at some point you have 4 or more creature tokens, which we all know is very easy right now, especially with some of the stuff we know is also coming in Bloomburrow, all your tokens have flying. Like, this card could just be played as a finisher in tokens decks, right? Like, you just play it on turn 4 or 5. Now all your stuff has flying, and you just get in there. So yeah, this is, ooh boy. This card has potential to be really strong. Chainsaw. Colorless and a red. It's an artifact equipment. When it enters, it deals 3 to up to 1 target creature. So, has to hit a creature, but it's still 3 damage for 2, which is fine. Whenever 1 or more creatures die, put a rev counter on Chainsaw. So it doesn't say dies from this ability, just as a creature dies, you put a counter on here. And then equipped creature gets +X+0. X is the number of counters on it, and it equips for 3. This is okay. This is probably better than it feels like, right? Because at a minimum, it just deals 3 and kills something, which is awesome. And that means it's going to be at least a +1, assuming you killed something small. But then, just as creatures die during combat, creatures die to other spells, this just gets bigger. And then eventually every creature you have after that is like +X or whatever. Not trample or anything, but if you have flyers or something, this could be useful. There is an interesting to note here, though. It doesn't say non-token creatures. So if you are playing a tokens type deck, tokens die all the time because they're so small. So this could also just make the next thing really big. So yeah, I don't know if this finds a home right off the bat, because I think a lot of the creature decks kind of are attacking and doing stuff on different angles. But it is a cool card that could get some play. Cursed Recording, 2 colorless, red. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a time counter on Cursed Recording. If there are 7 or more time counters on it, remove those counters and it deals 20 damage to you? Wow. Okay, when you next cast an instant or sorcery, you can tap this. When you next cast your instant or sorcery spell, this turn you copy the spell. You can choose new targets for the copy. Oh, this card is quirky. You can copy your instants and sorceries at the price of putting counters on the Cursed Recording. But once there's 7 or more, you lose. Well, you get 20 damage dealt to you. You may not lose because you might have like 25 life or something. Oh man, this card. It's also interesting because you can just use it. Oh, well, it's whenever you play an instant or sorcery. So even if you don't use the ability, you're still going to put counters on it. Wow. Yeah, I don't know about this card. Like, inevitably, something that's just letting you copy your instants or sorcery for the rest of the game is gotta be useful. It's just how much is it worth playing with that other option? But I have to assume this is playable, right? Like, if not, we're just gonna build a fun one on the YouTube channel just to have some goofy fun with this card. But yeah, it's really neat. Layline of Hope, 2 colorless, white. It's an enchantment. If it's in your opening hand, you can play it when the game begins for free. If you would gain life, you gain that much +1 instead. As long as you have 7 life more than your starting life total, creatures you control get +1/+1. Or +2/+2. So again, this fits life gain strategies. We saw the other, what was it? The snake or whatever. Like, this will go into some decks just straight up. I mean, being able to gain bonus life and be able to give all your creatures +2/+2. We're going to, honestly, the life gain decks might end up just almost having too many choices. I mean, their lists are going to be real tight after all the cards are going to be available because only a few rotate. So having some other options like this could be really good for them because they do lose some key cards like the veteran and such that, you know, are gaining life every time something comes in. But we do have other cards that could fill some of those slots. So we'll see what happens. So yeah, there were more cards there than I anticipated, but I'm kind of curious which ones y'all are looking forward to. Do any of these fit any decks that you already have built? So I think that's a fun discussion to have. And if you haven't seen it yet, check out my other video where we covered all the Bloomburrow previews. So you're up to speed on what's going on right now, because this was a wild weekend of cards getting previewed. But that's all I have for you for now. We'll see you next time.